Hello and welcome to our training today on an overview of the care agreement and care plan. And this training is specifically designed for volunteer supporters to help volunteer supporters better understand how care participants can be connected to services through these types of plans. So let's take a look at our agenda today and what we'll be covering. So the first section, we're going to really focus on what those paths to services are in the care process and describe how people will move throughout the process as a way to connect them to services. And those are primarily through voluntary engagement, a care agreement, or a care plan. And we'll talk about more about those in a moment. And then in the second half, we're really going to break down what are those components and elements of a care agreement and care plan. So what are those services that individuals will be connected to, and then discuss the importance of individualizing those services for these care participants. So some learning objectives today. Our goal is that by the end of this training, you will have an increased ability to identify the three main paths to services and supports during the care process, be able to describe the differences between those three paths, so the voluntary engagement, a care agreement, and a care plan, and then identify some of the elements of a care agreement and care plan. Now, you as the volunteer supporter won't be responsible for knowing what these are or for filling them out or for connecting an individual to services, but you'll be there, and we'll talk about your role later on, but your role will really be to help coach the individual understand their options and make sure that their choices and preferences are reflected in those different pathways. So now I'm really pleased to introduce you to a couple, to our presenters today. We have Rachel Johnson-Yates and Deborah Rose, and they both have very passionate about supporting individuals in these circumstances. So Rachel Johnson-Yates is a licensed mental health and addiction counselor, and she has dedicated her career to increasing access to care through approaching her work from an equity-focused and trauma-informed framework. And Dr. Deborah Rose is a clinical psychologist, and she oversaw Kendra's Law, which is an assisted outpatient treatment program in New York City. And she was also a deputy director of behavioral health across Rikers Island jail system. And she has a passion for patient-centered and patient-driven care. So we're really pleased to hear from these speakers. So I'm going to turn the time over today to Deborah to talk to us about the different paths to services in the care process. Deborah?
Thank you, Patricia. It's great to be here with you today. I look forward to talking about this more. And thank you, Rachel. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. In today's session, we're going to learn more about the different paths to service process. We'll focus on the care agreement and the care plan, and we'll also talk more about the role of a volunteer supporter. We have a high-level overview for you here where we take a look at some of the different venues or the path into services. In the second column entitled Care Process, this is what we're really going to get into in more detail today, what that looks like for somebody who may receive services through care. There are a few paths out of the system of care, and then as help continues ongoing. So I think it's important that we note that care has specific eligibility criteria, but ultimately how a person goes through care is very individualized, and it should be specific to that person's needs, wishes, preferences, and overall experience of the process. So with that, we'll focus on three different paths to services. We'll talk about the voluntary engagement in services, we'll talk about a care agreement, and then we'll discuss the care plan. Next slide, please. We often like to begin by presenting a scenario. It's not a real person, but it's somebody that perhaps we'll encounter as we support individuals throughout the care process. In this case, we're talking about someone named Maria. Maria is 50 years old. She was born and raised in another country, and English is not her first language. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 24, and she's had a history of some substance use over the years. She's also living with unmanaged diabetes. And while she does have parents who are available to support her, she's not able to live with them because of their living circumstances. As a result, she's often living in abandoned abandoned buildings throughout the city. She's at risk in those instances where she's staying in the abandoned buildings. She's experienced assault there and at times when she's been within the shelter. Maria's had multiple arrests in the last few years, each of them with less than 30 days of incarceration. So when we think about a system to provide support to people like Maria or others, we want to focus on the individual and their unique circumstance. As we go through today's discussion, let's think about Maria and consider how we might support Maria or others throughout services. Next slide, please. We'll do a quick introduction of the overall care process. We're really going to be focusing on three aspects here. We're going to go over, rather than going over the process in depth, we will talk about the voluntary agreement. You can see that highlighted. We'll talk about the care plan, and you can see the care agreement. Each one of these are numbered differently, and we'll get into details throughout this discussion. Let's begin with the voluntary engagement. We're going to talk about all of them in details, but just to give you a side-by-side perspective so that you can compare and contrast and see what they have in common, we'll take a look at the voluntary engagement. We'll take a look at the care agreement, labeled number 2, the care plan, labeled number 3. All of these paths connect people to services. Again, those highly individualized personal services, and they connect support and recovery options. Beginning with the volunteer engagement, number 1 on the left side of the screen, here is when a person engages early with the behavioral health agency in their community, and they accept services. They're offered an individual plan of care, considering their unique circumstances, and the person agrees and engages in services. In this situation, the case is dismissed, and treatment, services, supports are provided outside the care process. In the middle of our screen, labeled number 2, we have the care agreement. And here, the treatment, the services, supports take place within the care process. All parties, and when we talk about parties in this case, we're referring to the care participant, to their counsel, to the behavioral health agency, and ideally to the volunteer supporter who's identified early on. When we talk about parties, we're saying that all parties here are in agreement with the plan and the idea of what kind of supports are in place for this individual's recovery. The care agreement in this case is approved by the court, and it is enacted to offer services for folks like Maria or others. And then on the right side of the screen, we have the care plan, which is labeled number 3. The care plan also takes place within the care system. And here, this identifies that perhaps all of the parties, the folks who are invested in Maria and others like her, if they're not on the same page with what should be part of a plan, if they don't agree to all of the services. In this case, the court will adopt elements of Maria or others like her, their plans that support the recovery. And so here's where the court will help step in and identify a plan of care based on all parties' input. So we've seen a side-by-side comparison now. Let's take a look at each of them a little bit more closely. And keep in mind that a volunteer supporter can help the care participant understand the differences between each of them, the similarities, can help express the participants' wishes, ideals, goals throughout the process, so that they can ensure that their voice is heard. So let's talk a little bit more about the voluntary engagement and services. After the initial petition is submitted to the court makes what's called a prima facie, which really means first impression or at a first glance. That's when the court looks at if the individual appears to meet eligibility for care. At this stage, if the court determines that it seems the person may or is eligible for care, the court will order the county agency, which is typically the county behavioral health agency, to assess the individual. The county agency will work with them to identify services, to offer voluntary services, and they'll submit a report to the court regarding the assessment and regarding their efforts to engage the individual in voluntary care. At this point, this ends the court's involvement and the recommendations are made, and the person continues with ongoing services that are secured and organized and offered by the agency. If we come back to Maria as an example for a care participate, here she's voluntarily engaging in services. Her wishes, her thoughts about how those services are offered are considered, and the care court dismisses the case. In this situation, there's no care agreement, no plan is needed other than the one that's been established by all the voluntary parties, and the Behavioral Health Agency and Maria will develop a plan outside of care. Go to the next slide. So let's take a look at details about a care agreement. In this case, we're saying perhaps Maria has not voluntarily engaged in services, and in turn, the case is not dismissed. If the court finds that Maria is eligible for care based on the County Behavioral Health Agency report and based on their recommendations, the care court will move forward to creating a care agreement. Here, the care agreement is referred to as a voluntary settlement agreement that all parties have agreed to. And again, by parties, we're referring to the care participant and their counsel, the Behavioral Health Agency. If the care participant has a volunteer supporter, they may be involved and considered one of the parties as well. In this case, the care agreement is presented to the court for approval. The care agreement specifically outlines behavioral health services, potentially medications, potentially other housing and community services that the participant agrees to follow, and the county agrees to provide. In this case, the goal is to promote the participant's recovery and prepare them for graduation from care. One difference between the care agreement and the care plan is that the agreement includes at least one court review hearing within 60 days, whereas the care plan, which we'll talk about in a moment, includes ongoing progress review hearings at least every 60 days. For more information, you can visit, there's a link on your screen, the 2022 California Welfare and Institutions Code. Let's take a look at the next slide, please, with details on a care plan. This is the third pathway that we've mentioned, the care plan. This path to services occurs after it's determined that a care agreement cannot be reached. In this case, and we'll talk about Maria as an example, the court will order the county behavioral health provider to complete a clinical evaluation of Maria. If she's still found to meet eligibility requirements for care at the evaluation hearing, the court will order all of the parties to complete a care plan. Again, when we talk about the parties, we're talking about the behavioral health provider, Maria, her counsel, and a supporter if available and if appropriate. In this case, the care plan, it's very important to recognize, is again individualized. It's an appropriate range of community-based services and supports. It includes clinically appropriate behavioral health care and stabilization medications potentially, housing, and other supportive services as appropriate. Similar to a care agreement, the intent is to promote an individual's recovery and wellness. The care agreement is presented by the parties during a care plan review hearing. During the hearing, the court will decide which elements should be included in a care plan. It's important to note that the care statute stipulates that the county is also court ordered to provide these services for Maria. So this is a way of ensuring that services are made available to the individual and that the individual is participating in services. Again, for more information, you can refer to the 2022 California Welfare and Institutions Code. So now that we've discussed all of these potential kinds of care services, we want to zoom out a little bit and show you where in the process these three exist. And we'll refer back to it. Mark number 1 on your left side of their screen is the county and illustrates that the county and individual have voluntarily engaged in services. Labeled number 2 in the middle, the county and the care participant have worked to develop an agreed upon care agreement. And labeled number 3 below that in the middle of your screen, here the parties propose a care plan and the court adopts the elements that support the individual's stability, recovery, and wellness. At this time, what I'd like to do is invite Rachel to join me. And Rachel, I might ask you, given what we're talking about, what are some differences between the care agreement and the care plan?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. So, from what we've been talking about today, there's a couple of main differences between the care agreement and the care plan. With the care agreement, this is the pathway that is followed if Maria decides not to voluntarily engage in services, but does remain eligible for care. At this point, there's going to be an attempt to develop a care agreement as the next step. And the care agreement will include court approved services that Maria at this point is going to hopefully agree to accept and that the county is going to agree to provide. Now, if a care agreement can't be met or made, then oftentimes we will shift to the care plan. And so this will occur if Maria does not agree with the services that are recommended in the care agreement. And if this takes place, a clinical evaluation will be ordered. And if it is found that she is indeed still eligible for the care process, then a care plan will be developed. And the main difference here is that the care plan will also include services much like the care agreement. However, in the care plan, Maria will be court ordered to accept them, and the county will be court ordered to provide the services. So that's really kind of the main difference between the two.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think what's important to note, and we say this throughout, is that really every instance we are trying to get agreement. We encourage people to voluntarily participate. That's the first goal. But regardless of whether it's an agreement or a care plan, voluntary, we really want to ensure that the individual's voice, their preferences, their needs, their wishes, their goals are heard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Deborah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay. So now we're going to change gears a little bit and start talking about some of the components of the care agreement and the care plan itself. So we've so far provided an overview of the paths to accessing care and services within the care process. And here we're going to talk about the care agreement, the care plan, and where the volunteer supporter will really be able to help fit in this process. So before we get into the different components of the care plan and the care agreement, we want to start off by outlining the role of the volunteer supporter. A volunteer supporter likely hasn't been identified at the time where the county has attempted to engage Maria voluntarily in services. However, right around the time that voluntary engagement starts to take place, ideally, Maria will have identified a supporter. Maria or any other care participant will identify a supporter that they want to be working in partnership with them while they're involved in the care process. In Maria's case, she's chosen her cousin Claire to be her volunteer supporter. So let's think about how Claire could participate in the development of a care agreement or plan. So to do that, it's important to keep in mind that the supporter's main responsibilities in the care process are to help the care participant understand, make and communicate decisions, and express their own preferences through the care proceedings. So as Deborah put very well just a few minutes ago, all throughout this process, regardless of where a person is in a care agreement, a care plan, that person's decisions and preferences are really of the utmost importance. The supporter's next responsibility is to offer the care participant a flexible, culturally responsive way to maintain their own decision-making authority regarding their own life to the greatest extent possible. And then the supporter is also encouraged to use supported decision-making, which is an approach to help them increase the care participant's ability to make their own decisions. So when we think about the development of a care agreement or plan, Claire could start with some of the following techniques. She could approach Maria using a trauma-informed principle of empathy, transparency, collaboration, meaning that she's working alongside Maria to collaboratively help her identify her preferences and choices in regards to the care process. Claire could spend some time learning about Maria's treatment history to the extent that Maria feels comfortable sharing about her experience. So here it's really great to have a conversation about what worked for Maria in the past, what didn't. What providers has she found helpful? What providers were not a fit for her? How has Maria responded to medications or other treatments in the past? Oftentimes, these are really, really important ways to make sure that the care participant feels heard, feels seen, and really is an active participant in the decisions that are being made about their process and involvement in the care process itself. The volunteer supporter also has an opportunity to help Maria understand different paths to services. So helping her understand the options that are there, how they might be connected, what order they might occur in. Also helping Maria understand the potential benefits of engaging in the care process. For a lot of people, engaging in treatment or the care process itself may feel anxiety provoking, and the more information that we have and the more that we understand what is happening, the more comfortable we will feel and the less anxiety provoking that it will be. And again, using that supported decision-making approach to better understand and increase Maria's ability to communicate her needs and preferences. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, we'd love to encourage you to check out some more information about the supporter role. There's some links at the bottom of this slide for the Volunteer Supporter Toolkit, the supporter role in the CARE Act, and we have there both a brief and a training that the volunteer supporters can use as resources. So let's take a closer look at what is included in a care agreement and a care plan. In short, the care agreement and the care plan include a lot of the same elements, all with the intent to support the care participant in accessing treatment and supports. The main differences between the care agreement and the care plan is that the care agreement may include continued court oversight beyond the initial 60-day review hearing, and the care plan will include court oversight with ongoing review hearings. So that really is one of the biggest differences between the two is, again, with the care agreement, there may just be an initial 60-day review hearing, and that may be the extent of the court oversight. Whereas if a care plan is the process in which the services will be decided, then there will be ongoing court oversight. The care plan will include the individual's information and will outline services to be received and may include the following: behavioral health services, which will include both mental health and substance use disorder services, medically necessary stabilizing medications, funded housing resources, funded social services, additional services provided related to county aid and relief to individuals who are indigent, and services in the care plan include that both the participant and the behavioral health agency will be expected to adhere to what is in the care plan. It's not just a list of treatment services that they have to engage with according to the court oversight. It's services that they have a right to receive and that the county will be required to make sure that that individual is receiving. The judge may also order some prioritization of services such as housing and supports. And these services, of course, are subject to available funding in federal and state laws. The County Behavioral Health Agency may also provide additional services beyond what is in the care plan, if that's something that is decided upon between the Behavioral Health Agency and the individual engaging in the care process. Other Medi-Cal services like CalAIM, ECM, or enhanced care management, community supports may be suggested by the courts as well, but those likely will not be ordered. And for more information, you can visit the 2022 California Welfare and Institutions Code. Behavioral health services may include services like the Assertive Community Treatment or ACT services, Full Service Partnerships or FSP. They may include other outreach intensive care management team models as determined to be appropriate for the care participant to help support their stability and recovery. So again, the services may include a variety of things. It could be a multidisciplinary team that has a case manager that's helping with care coordination, both internally and externally. And this person's role is really to kind of take a lot of the stress and the pressure off of the care participant and to make sure that all of the different parties and providers that are helping support the care participant are communicating and ensuring that the way that they're working together is in the best interest of the care participant. Ideally, there will be a low client to staff ratio, meaning that individuals will have the opportunity to meaningfully meet with the service provider that they're working with. Again, they may have some case management services, including outreach. They may be involved in mental health, substance use disorder services. They may get some help with employment. They may work with individuals called peers, who are people who have lived experience with mental health and or substance use needs. And peers are really essential for recovering individuals to really help them understand that there are people that get better and people with lived experience are able to offer that lived experience as a support and as a model to help individuals who are early in their recovery navigate through what that process might look like. They may receive coordination with other providers, including the ECM care managers, community health workers, housing navigators. There may be other sorts of interventions like skill building, other community services that might include things like housing access to food, nutrition, transportation, and potentially crisis services. And what's really important to know, because this list is pretty comprehensive, is that the care participants that any individual is working with may need any combination of these services. And it may be that there's a certain combination that is decided upon at the onset of a person's involvement with the care process, and that may evolve over time. There may be certain services that get completed or are found to not be being effective, and other services that are identified as a need. And this sort of responsive flexibility of access to care will be really important as a person is navigating the care process. So with Maria, while we don't know everything about her, we do know that her mental health concerns have been untreated for some time. And she is currently exhibiting some symptoms of psychosis and is actively using substances. And here, she may be a person that is a good candidate for some medically necessary stabilizing medication. Of course, this would need to be assessed by somebody who is a licensed prescriber. And what's really important to know about these medications is that a court can determine that a medication is medically necessary when it's reasonable and necessary to protect life or to prevent significant illness or disability or to alleviate severe pain. And typically, the stabilizing medications that we talk about in the care plan consist of antipsychotic medications that can be given to reduce symptoms of hallucinations, delusions, and other sorts of symptoms associated with psychosis. They may be administered as long-acting injections if that's appropriate. However, it's really, really important to know that as part of the care proceedings, these medications shall not be forcibly administered. And so while they may be in the care plan and ideally have been decided upon in collaboration with the care participant, they are not to be forcibly administered at any time. The court might decide to order medication if it finds by clear and convincing evidence that the care participant does not have the mental capacity to give informed consent. And that informed consent capacity involves understanding the basic elements for the condition being treated, the reasons it's being treated, and how the medication is supposed to assist with treatment, and what it means if the individual decides not to take the medication. So ideally, the medication decisions are made in collaboration with the care participant. The only space in which the care participant may not be as involved is if they really at that time do not have the mental capacity to give that informed consent in those sorts of decisions. Next slide, please. Housing is an incredibly important component to the care process. We all know that finding stable housing and staying connected to treatment finding stability and staying connected to treatment is very difficult unless we have a roof over our heads. People can better utilize services, maintain employment, sustain recovery when they are not experiencing the stressors of living in an unstable environment. So each individual care participant will likely need a diverse range of housing options. This may include clinically enhanced interim or bridge housing, licensed adult and senior care facilities. It may include supportive housing or housing with family and friends. And although the volunteer supporter's role is not to know every single resource that might be available in the care participant's county, it is helpful for the supporter to be aware that there is an array of options that the individual may be able to access. and the supporter can encourage the care participant to ask their case manager about the options that are available to them. Housing first is a term that refers to a philosophy that recognizes housing as a basic human right for every person, and that understands, as we have mentioned, that people can better utilize services, maintain employment, sustain recovery when they have housing stability. Under a housing first mentality, housing preconditions and requirements like sobriety, program completion, counseling are eliminated. And so this means that if a program follows a housing first model, that they are not having to jump through all sorts of hoops to be able to keep a roof over their head. In 2016, Senate Bill 1380 required all homeless housing programs to adopt a housing first model. And for the volunteer supporters that are on this training, that is really, really important to remember, that any of the programs that the care participant may be navigating are required to adopt this housing first model that eliminates a lot of these barriers to maintaining housing. So there are lots of types of housing first models and resources that include bridge housing. And within bridge housing, the primary focus is to help people experiencing homelessness who have serious behavioral health conditions that prevent them from accessing help and moving out of homelessness. The BHBH program provides funding for operational and supportive services that aren't covered by other funding sources to expand bridge housing implementation. And this is one of the programs that is prioritized for participants in care. Another type of housing is interim housing. It could include recovery houses, sober living, recuperative care models, community reentry and diversion housing programs, tiny homes, motel vouchers, motel-based sheltering efforts, navigation centers, peer respite, crisis housing, and other sorts of transitional housing that might be present in your county. Rapid rehousing is an approach that rapidly connects individuals and families who are unhoused to permanent housing offered without preconditions. And again, these preconditions include things like employment, income, absence of criminal records, sobriety. And this is done through a time-limited financial assistance and targeted supportive services like case management, help with housing selection, and employment connection. Then we have permanent supporting housing. And with permanent supportive housing, this is where housing is linked, subsidized housing is linked with access to flexible, voluntary support services like case management, mental health, substance use disorder treatment, independent living skills, vocation or employment services, health and medical care, peer support, social activities. Again, with permanent supportive housing, it should be low barrier, and participants should have the same tenancy rights as any other renter. Some examples of these programs include No Place Like Home, the California Housing Accelerator, and the Multifamily Housing Program. There are other affordable housing options being explored for care participants, including subsidized housing and different types of vouchers such as Section 8. And for more information around housing resources, please visit the 2022 California Welfare and Institutions Code 5982. In addition to housing supports that may be noted in the care agreement or plan, the CARE Act also specifies social services and supports that may be in the care plan, such as things like social services, which is income support funded through SSI, CalWorks, which is cash aid for housing, food, clothing, medical expenses, the California Food Assistance Program like CalFresh and WIC, in-home supportive services. The care participant is not limited to these care agreement and care plan services highlighted in the code, but there may be other services or resources that the care participant needs, such as employment support, transportation, educational needs, and other sorts of basic needs that they may have, like clothing or toiletries. Similar to housing, availability of services and social supports are going to differ by county. And again, it's important to remember that the supporter's role is not to track down the right services for the care participant. This is the responsibility of the care manager or other service provider working with the care participant. However, it's going to be important for the supporter to know that these services may be available to the care participant. The supporter can then encourage the care participant to ask their case manager about the best available services and to kind of explore what might be out there so that the care participant has all of the resources they need to be able to achieve and maintain the sobriety that they are seeking throughout this process. And as we've touched on already, the care agreements and the care plans must be individually tailored to the need of the care participant. Care participants engaged in the care process often have had many experiences trying to access social services. It's important that we ask them about what they have tried, what has worked, what didn't, and that we keep in mind that individuals have multiple ways in which their identity could impact their preferences. And so when we think about this, it's important that we consider how aspects of identity like race, gender identity, mental health, disability, etc., might impact the placements or the services that we are considering for the individual. Care participants will have multiple complex chronic needs that have to be considered, and it's important to consider the whole person. This means that we don't treat only the mental health or only the substance use disorder or only the housing. We've really got to come around people from a holistic perspective and make sure that we are considering and meeting the variety of needs that they have. What we know is that needs often include things like housing, mental health treatment, substance use disorder needs, peer supports, transportation, employment, other community supports. And it's really important for the supporter to be aware of all of the variety of needs that the person might have, as the volunteer supporter role is about supporting the care participants and voicing and choosing individualized preferences. In many cases, we may make a plan to start seeing a certain treatment provider or go to a certain resource, and then on the day of, we might discover that the person needs some help with transportation. And so it's really important that the supporters step up and help the care participant advocate for themselves to make sure that they are getting these resources so that they're able to fluidly access the services that they need. And if there becomes, a struggle in accessing the services, the supporter is there to help the care participants voice their concerns, voice the needs that they have that aren't being met, and then work with the care team to make sure that we have a plan in place that will be functional and effective for the care participant. And remember again that the approaches of supported decision-making are very, very helpful in supporting this individual. Keeping in mind that the services that are included in the care plan should be adapted to meet each individual's needs, let's consider the unique needs that Maria has, which might end up impacting her care plan. So in terms of her preferences, we know that Maria prefers not to be in a clinic, and that her psychosis involves not wanting to be in closed spaces. So closed spaces are very triggering for Maria. Maria, we know, has co-occurring opioid use disorder, and she feels kind of back and forth about treatment, but she's willing to consider it and discuss outpatient options such as medications for addiction treatment. She prefers individual therapy rather than group therapy because group therapy can feel very overwhelming and very overstimulating. And as we consider the idea that she doesn't like being in closed spaces, we can see how group therapy would probably feel too much for her. Maria prefers to not engage in treatment options that are religiously focused. And she has a long history of medications that she has tried, many of which have either not worked, only worked for a little bit, made her feel groggy and disconnected. And Maria has some pretty significant preferences about which medications she does and does not prefer. And it's really, really important that this is reflected in her care agreement or care plan. And so let's think about how our volunteer supporter might be able to help ensure that Maria's preferences are respected in her care plan. A volunteer supporter might be able to help Maria voice her preferences on medication to the treatment team and encourage an open communication with the prescriber. The volunteer supporter could also ensure that the treatment reflects her preferences for individual therapy in informal settings, and ensuring that treatment is not religiously focused, and helping Maria in the process of developing a care agreement or care plan, which can feel complex and may feel overwhelming for Maria. The supporter's role is really important in making sure that each of these aspects are well represented and well discussed as the care plan or care agreement is being developed with the team. Whether we are doing a care agreement or a care plan, the care participant or respondent, which is Maria, her attorney, the behavioral health agency, and a volunteer supporter, if desired by the care participant, will coordinate together. And it's important to remember that an attempt to reach a care agreement comes before the care plan. This is the earlier attempt to align on services that the county agrees to provide and that Maria would agree to accept. If it's not likely that they're going to be able to reach an agreement, Maria's journey will take her toward the path of developing a care plan. During the development of a care plan, the parties are still going to work together. However, the county behavioral health agency, the care participant, or both may ultimately present separate proposed care plans. And after consideration of the plans proposed by each of the parties, the court will adopt the elements of the care plan that support the recovery and stability of the individual. And so as we think of that, that is kind of how all of these different pieces and parties are going to work together to support the care participant. Next slide. And so throughout this training, we've talked about the components of the care agreement and the plan, and the requirements for agreements and plans to be individualized. And I'd like to open this up to my colleague, Dr. Rose, and hear a little bit from your perspective as we're thinking about volunteer supporters. How can a supporter best help the individual find their voice in advocating for their needs and preferences?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think that's a great question. And you highlighted a couple examples that I might just reiterate. Volunteer supporter working with Maria can really help identify some of those specific preferences, like services that are available in the community, an individual rather than in a group setting. So maybe identifying some ACT teams or other services that are willing to go into the community. You mentioned that Maria has been using substances and she's a little resistant to treatment. Perhaps identifying and supporting her desires for a harm reduction model versus an abstinence model. Maybe she prefers services at a certain location or offered by in a language that she feels most comfortable with. Maybe she'd like her supporter to accompany her to housing interviews or to other kinds of appointments. And so I think it's really about reiterating what you've talked about, ensuring that her needs, her preferences, her identity, and her priorities are expressed to all of the participants who are working to support her in care.
Thank you so much. With that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Patricia.
Thank you, Rachel and Deborah. And, as the volunteer supporter, our goal at the end of this training is for you to have an increased ability to identify those three main paths to services and supports during the care process that Deborah and then Rachel elaborated on, and then describe the differences between the voluntary engagement, a care agreement, and a care plan, and identify the elements of a care agreement and care plan. And then, just like my colleagues mentioned, the goal of the volunteers or the role of the volunteer supporter isn't to drive these conversations, but to help the care participant understand what these pathways look like and how they can better engage and how their preferences and choices voiced throughout this process. So we appreciate you taking the time to view this recording. We wanted to share a couple more resources for you. The Volunteer Supporter Toolkit, you may be aware of this resource. If you don't, this is a helpful resource for volunteer supporters. It walks them through different roles in the care process. It includes different steps in that court process that happens at the beginning, and also has a worksheet that you can download and use as you're helping the care participant go through care. We also wanted to let you know about some other trainings that could be helpful if you haven't viewed those as well. We have a training on the care process for volunteer supporters. We also have other trainings on housing services and supports, supported decision-making, which Rachel mentioned, trauma-informed care, elimination of bias, psychiatric advanced directives, and more training on the role of the volunteer supporter. So if you haven't viewed those trainings, please go on the CARE Act Resource Center, under the trainings, and you can search by topics. You can also just plug in I'm a volunteer supporter, and you can find those trainings and resources that are most applicable for you. There is no wrong door, so I want you to know about the CARE Act Resource Center, which has a lot of resources for volunteer supporters. But if you need help trying to figure out what the next step is, or connecting with individuals from county, or better understanding how to petition, please email info@careact.org, and we can help get you to the right person. So once again, thank my colleagues Deborah and Rachel for presenting, and I appreciate you taking the time. Please reach out if you have any questions.